Hello and welcome, I'm Oles Garjuk and you're watching Head to Head with UATV. This month marks 5 years since Ukraine's Crimean Peninsula was invaded and subsequently occupied by Russia. As a result, today Crimea is a human rights black hole. Russia has imposed a ban on all international monitors and aid agencies. To discuss Russia's aggression in Crimea, we're joined by retired Major General Volodymyr Havrylov, former Defence Attache of Ukraine in the United States, Great Britain and Romania. Hello and thank you for coming.
Thank you for the invitation.
So, Major General, by annexing Crimea in 2014, Russia violated 487 agreements and treaties. Among them, 407 bilateral agreements with Ukraine and 80 international treaties. So let's recall those events of 5 years. How exactly did Russian military manage to cut off the Crimean Peninsula from the mainland Ukraine? What do you personally remember about that dramatic period?
Well, for me it was very well-known period, and at the time I was one of the chiefs of analytical branch in the Ministry of Defense, with a clear requirement to follow the information about the situation in the east and the southeast of Ukraine. And be honest, we knew everything about Russian movements in Crimea and around Ukraine at the time. The problem was with the lack of leadership in Ukraine. President of Ukraine, the government and the security services were without persons. All of them fled exactly on the same day, 22nd February 2014, to Russia.
As ousted President Yanukovych.
Right. So the specifics of the situation was that we had a lot of Russian troops on the territory of Ukraine at the time, on the legal basis.
So because of the Black Sea, before the invasion?
Before the invasion, more than 20,000 Russian troops were in Crimea. They were legal troops, according to bilateral agreements, Black Sea Fleet status and others.
Yes,
so they had even Air Force. They had other units supporting and logistic units in Crimea. So it's not about movement of huge numbers of forces from Russia to Ukraine, to Crimea at the time. Mm-hmm. It was about hybrid warfare, how to achieve the goal which Moscow had in their minds by other means, not to use force directly, but to use paramilitary proxies, so-called, local pro-Russian elements, Cossacks and other things, in peculiar way, and just to confuse Ukrainian side, this international community, and to achieve the goal of annexation, to create the conditions for referendum, illegal referendum at the time. The general expectation of Putin at the time was the collapse of Ukraine. They expected that after the fled of the president and all other bodies, Ukraine will be without rulers, without order, without nothing. It's an easy victim for everybody. And they expected that a lot of pro-Russian elements, especially in the east and southeast of Ukraine, will emerge on the scene, and they will take care of the country, and they will proceed with the returning the country back to the Russia.
But what do you mean by collapse of Ukraine? What parts of Ukraine would you see Putin seizing? Because we do know that there is a lot of intelligence data revealed now, and that Putin didn't mean to step only on Crimea and didn't want to end only on this conflict in the Donbass. So what territories did he intend to bite off, and did he intend to just divide Ukraine and leave this kind of so to say, republics, or did he intend to seize the territories and annex them to Russia?
For Putin, events in Ukraine were unexpected. He didn't expect that the central power will collapse so quickly. It was a huge surprise in Moscow about the February 20th.
Yanukovych fled?
Yes, yes. Nobody expected.
He wanted him to stay.
Yes, for them, for Moscow, it would be much more comfortable to have Yanukovych in Ukraine at the time.
Of course, having a
it would be easy to achieve many things in legal way. But to surprise, he fled to Russia. It created a very specific situation, and Russia expected that pro pro-Russian elements, especially in east and southeast of Ukraine, starting from Donbass, Mariupol, Mykolaiv, Odessa, all those spots, they're base for party of regions at the time, pro-Russian party. And so expectation there that people in those regions will not support central events in Kiev, and they will emerge on the scene as a force of change, force of stabilization, something like that. But expectations were wrong because not enough activities in the south and southeast of Ukraine from locals. So Russia sent proxy there from Russia, Girkin-type people, paramilitary Cossacks, trying to initiate, to encourage locals to be more active, more aggressive, to take power back to former, let it be, leaders. And it was a huge surprise in Moscow at the time that the civil society in Ukraine
stood up,
and they were so mature that even without the leadership, formal leadership of the country, and a new phenomenon emerged, like volunteers, like battalions, volunteer battalions, like other things.
And patriots, we do know that there was a problem in Ukraine with patriotism.
It was unexpected to Russia because they don't have similar phenomenon back in Russia. It's specific of Ukraine.
Because Russians are more scared of the government than probably supporting the government.
Absolutely.
But I would like to ask another thing. If you mentioned this Russian proxy troops functioning in Crimea, according to the other intelligence data provided by ex-chief of the General Staff, Colonel General Volodymyr Havrylov, Russians' activity, hybrid activity in Crimea, started even a month before the invasion. So did the Ministry of Defense know about this? Because there was this intelligence data and Yanukovych's regime ignored it, of course. But did the Ministry of Defense, was the Ministry of Defense aware of this fact?
First of all, the Minister of Defense was from Sevastopol. So he was almost a pro-Russian person.
Okay.
For him, it's not a surprise.
So they were rooting for this.
Well, but we have to understand that Russian hybrid activities in Crimea started not on the eve of our situation in Ukraine 5 years ago. It started much earlier, and exactly after the collapse of the Soviet Union. I still remember...
Right after Ukraine just gained independence.
Yes. After Ukraine gained independence, the idea was how to take Crimea back. And using the moods in Crimea, using the history and other things. I've been in Crimea many times, according to my service requirement. I was there in 1993, when there was first attempts to take Crimea back to Russia, using local proxies. Then I was there many times later. I saw the activities on a different levels, starting from non-government groups, non-government projects from Russia, supplied from Russia with money and other things. And of course, it was very crucial for Russia to have a military presence there as a part of the Black Sea arrangements. It was a huge, not strategic mistake, but a tragedy of Ukraine that we signed the agreement with Russia to keep the forces on their territory. The presence of Russian troops in Crimea, they encourage local pro-Russian elements and other proxies to be more active, to more provocative, and be ready at any time to follow events.
But probably there was just no political will before, because every other president used to be, except of Yushchenko, used to be pro-Russian candidate. So basically, why wouldn't they sign this agreement? Yes.
Correct. We lived in the atmosphere of friendship, atmosphere of neighborhood, and atmosphere of predictable future, in atmosphere of enemies not on the east but on the west, like that. It was our historical problem.
I would like to ask you, what reaction was Russia actually expecting or anticipating from Ukraine back then in 2014, when they invaded?
They had a clear understanding there will be no response from Ukraine because of lack of the leadership, the collapse of the military. the collapse of the military commanders, especially in the center. In Crimea, the units, our Ukrainian armed forces or other forces, they were ready to do something following the orders from the center. But the situation in Kiev, was very unstable, unclear. Nobody was in charge of anything. It took several weeks before the consolidation of some kind of power in Kiev and some kind of messages from Kiev to people in Crimea what to do. But all of those messages were not quite certain, not quite decisive, and like that.
Well, some experts say that Russia was probably expecting Ukraine to defend Crimea and to declare war, so then there would be this logical and official reason to attack Ukraine and fulfill this blitzkrieg operation and seize Kiev. We do know what experts are saying this. I would like to know your take on this.
There are many conspiracy theories about that. But yes, for Russia it would be much more comfortable if Ukraine started to apply force in Crimea, especially against local population or non-military people who were surrounding our units. Because it would create the similar situation like in Georgia in 2008, when Georgian troops started to do something with Russia in South Ossetia. And because of the military force, because of the blood, because of the victims, Russia later they explained the action with the idea to protect local population, to restore the peace and order like that. So in case of Crimea, if Ukraine followed the similar way as in Georgia, I think we had the similar reaction from Russia with a real force, but with a clear explanation. It's all about protection of the population. And I think we would have a very not clear situation in the United Nations General Assembly when there was a voting about the referendum in Crimea later. And Ukraine got a huge support from other countries in the case. When Georgia tried to do that in 2008, 2009...
The reaction wasn't the same.
The reaction was different. Many countries, they were confused. They really didn't know what happened because there was different information, and at the same time there were information about the civil population which was killed by military actions and other things. In Ukraine, it was a very clear picture. No forces were applied from Ukraine, very clear Russian presence, very clear results of illegal referendum. So now we have a very strong legal basis for any kind of courts in future.
So the guilt was very visible, yeah.
Absolutely,
and we do see now
absolutely.
that it looks like this conflict in Georgia is kind of, so to say, I'm afraid to say this, but forgiven to Russia by the world community because it's forgotten. Well, unfortunately, we are running out of time, but I do want to ask the very last question. Russian occupation of 2014 became a real ethnic catastrophe for Crimean Tatar people, because after this tragic eviction that happened back in 1944, after they survived through this Gulag death camps, they managed to come back home, and now we are afraid that the history might be repeating, because we do know the Kremlin has banned the Majlis, the National Crimean Tatar Parliament, that Tatar education, Tatar language and culture and religion are being harassed constantly. People, activists are persecuted and also thrown to jail. So my question to you as a person from a military sphere, how to overthrow the dictatorship?
Russia is not the country to stand up against the central power just without any clear problem they had on the ground. If they're hungry, if they are not very satisfied with the everyday activities, we can't expect a lot of. But the problem of Russia is with the strength of Ukraine. The stronger Ukraine is in terms of economy, in terms of democratic changes, in terms of military, in terms of our human rights things and like that, the weaker position of Russia is. Because Moscow is afraid of successes of Ukraine. And any success in Ukraine is a nail to the coffin of Russian dictatorship. We have to understand it. And Tatars are on our side because they live in the country. They live in the country or the region in Crimea. And it's a huge problem for Russia as well, because they understand they never take Tatars back to the mental homeland, let it be so. So all we can do now to concentrate on our internal things, to become stronger.
Our strength.
And time is on our side. And the problem of Russia, because they have no plan, exit plan for future at all. So they're afraid of our successes. They're afraid of our changes. And that is our power, that is our force, and we have to understand it.
That we have to be stronger.
And we have to be stronger.
This is very interesting. Thank you so much for your comments, and thank you for being a guest today in our studio.
Thank you for having me.
That was retired Major General Volodymyr Havrylov, former Defence Attache of Ukraine in the United States, Great Britain and Romania. Thank you for watching Head to Head. I'm Oles Gojuk. Goodbye.